If you lived in ancient Rome, your morning wouldn't start with a shower, coffee, and a smartphone. It would start with noise outside your window, the screech of carts on cobblestones, barking dogs, shouting merchants, and a cacophony no shutters could block. Rome was never quiet, especially in the morning. And if today you wake up in the silence of your bedroom, with blackout curtains and air conditioning, back then you'd simply be used to waking up to the chaos of the city. Most likely, you'd live in an insula, a multi-story tenement, where the higher you lived, the smaller, cheaper, and more dangerous it got. Buildings often collapsed or caught fire. Apartment would be a generous word. You'd share a cramped, windowless, toiletless room with family or neighbors. No heating, no ventilation, no amenities. Today, you have an orthopedic mattress, a pillow, a soft duvet. Back then, wooden boards, straw, a woolen blanket. In the morning, you'd rise from your hard cot, back cracking, and pull on a simple tunic, often your only one. Need the toilet? You'd grab a chamber pot and dump it out the window. That's just daily life. Yes, and the smell matched. In the 21st century, you have a bathroom, plumbing, hot water. In Rome, a public latrine somewhere in the courtyard, or a pot, or behind the house, whatever worked. And yes, no one would be surprised if something dripped on you from above. Everyone did the same. To wash your face, you'd use cold water from a public fountain. There's no tap in your room, no hot water. Water doesn't even enter your home, even if you aren't poor. To drink, wash, or brush your teeth, if you even knew what a toothbrush was, you'd have to step outside. Today, you just turn on the tap. Back then, grab a jug, wait in line. Water was a shared resource, not a private convenience. Smells. A Roman morning didn't smell like fresh coffee or shower gel. It smelled like urine, smoke, rotting fish, sweat, and soot. People bathed rarely. Clothes were taken to laundries, where they were cleaned with human urine, because it contains ammonia. Imagine, today you wash your clothes in a machine with fragrant detergent. Back then, your clothes might still stink after cleaning. And that was normal. You step outside, and you're immediately in the stream of life. No sidewalks, carts, goats, children, merchants, all moving in the same space. Watch your step. Slop, manure, trash. Today you've got asphalt, bins, street sweepers. Back then, your sandals were nearly barefoot, with thin soles, and everything you stepped in was urban filth. Catching an infection? Just part of the morning routine. Clothes were simple, shoes uncomfortable, people around you loud. Romans were a noisy bunch. Merchants shouted out their goods. There were no newspapers. News was yelled in the streets. Street musicians, children, craftsmen, gossips. The city roared from sunrise. And if you complain about noise outside your window today, believe me, it's nothing compared to a Roman morning. Lighting? Barely any. Oil lamps were dim and smoky. If you had to wake before dawn, you were practically blind. Today, you flip on a night light, draw the curtains, and see. Back then, darkness, a flicker of light, and the smell of oil. You could count on light only after the sun rose. You exist in the same space as dozens of other people. No personal zone, no privacy. If you're not wealthy, then everything in your life is shared. Shared walls, shared stairs, shared courtyards, a shared struggle for clean water, and a safe path through the street. Comfort isn't part of the equation. Mornings aren't for yourself. They're part of survival. That's how a typical Roman's day began. Not with thoughts of goals or mindfulness, but with the basics. Wash your face, empty the chamber pot, avoid slipping in filth, reach the fountain, don't get run over by a cart. That was the norm. That was Rome. If you want, we can go on, and I'll tell you about your home, your daily life, how you'd store food, sleep, host guests, and clean your insula. If you lived in Rome, you'd be living in one of the most brilliantly planned and, at the same time, most chaotic megacities of the ancient world. On one hand, precise layouts, straight roads, forums, arches, baths, aqueducts. On the other, thousands of unofficial alleys, stalls, additions, and markets where life pulsed far beyond any order. Rome was a city of contrasts, architectural grandeur, and everyday mess. You'd know that the city wasn't just the center, but an endless sprawl of poor districts. The wealthiest lived in domus, freestanding houses with inner courtyards and marble columns. But those were few. You, like most people, would live in a cramped insula, and outside your window would be a noisy via, a street used by thousands. The main roads, Via Prenestina, Via Appia, connected Rome with the provinces. But inside the city, you'd walk through much narrower, filthier, crooked alleys, where buildings leaned into each other and blocked the sky. At night, streets were unlit. If you went out after sunset, don't expect street lamps. You'd carry a torch or an oil lamp. But darkness wasn't the biggest danger. The real threat was thieves. Entire gangs operated in Rome, especially in poor districts. Today, you'd call the police. Back then, your only hope was a dagger, if you could afford one. If you earned a living through trade or craft, your place was the forum or the market. Everything was sold there: bread, fish, wine, amphora, cloth, honey, olives. Commerce was the city's heartbeat. Noise, smells, haggling, shouting. The market was supermarket, social network, and news feed all in one. That's where all the gossip and all the headlines lived. No internet, but everything worked, loudly and in real time. You'd know. Rome had no central heating, but it did have thermae, public baths, not just for washing, but for meetings, deals, even political conversations. Think of them as a modern cafe, gym, and group chat rolled into one. The baths were free, or nearly free, and everyone went, from pauper to senator. If you wanted to clean up and catch up, you went to the thermae. On the streets, you'd see philosophers, doctors, scholars, craftsmen, prostitutes, priests, and soldiers, all mingled. Social roles showed in clothing, not behavior. In the forum, a senator might argue with a baker. And that, too, was Rome. If you lived in this city, you'd quickly understand. Everything is close. Everything overlaps. Everything is loud. Rome didn't divide space into clean and dirty, private and public like we do today. Life happened in full view. The street was a stage, and you were on it from morning to night. To survive meant learning to play your part, boldly, loudly, and with a firm stride on the cobblestones. If you lived in ancient Rome, you'd quickly realize that the climate spared no one. There was no air conditioning in the summer, no heating in the winter, not even the option to seal yourself inside a room with airtight windows. You existed in the climate, and it existed in your room, your clothes, your body. Summer in Rome wasn't just warm. It was dry, dusty, exhausting heat, especially in July and August. The air thick with dust, soot, smoke, and the stench of rotting waste. Picture this. You're walking down a street where the stone walls radiate heat like ovens. Your sandals soften underfoot. Your body drenched in sweat. Your skin burns. Today, you'd hide under the AC, slather on sunscreen, wear sunglasses. Back then, you had shade and cloth, and water, if you were lucky. The wealthy had gardens and fountains. You? A damp rag on your forehead. Many residents simply fled the city during the worst heat, escaping to countryside villas. But if you were poor, you stayed, which meant sleeping on rooftops, in the topmost room beneath the searing tiles. No fans, no breeze, just night air, and hope for clouds tomorrow. Then came winter. No snow, but cold rain, cutting winds, and damp stone walls that drank in the chill. Insulae had no heating. If you couldn't afford coal, you simply froze. You'd wear layers of tunics, wrap yourself in a wool blanket, and watch your breath turn to mist. Today, you'd turn on a heater. Then, you'd light a charcoal brazier. And with it, you'd risk carbon monoxide poisoning, because there was no ventilation. Now, the air. Think smog is a 21st century problem? Rome's air was gray long before industrialization. Why? Fires, furnaces, lamps, baths, forges, kitchens. The whole city smoked, especially in the colder months, when every home lit a fire. Smoke hung above the city, especially in narrow alleys where air couldn't circulate. People coughed, their eyes burned, but no one used the word pollution. Illness was just part of life. This is the air you'd step into every morning and breathe. There were no remedies. If you were sensitive to smoke, too bad. Allergies, asthma, irritation, they existed, but under different names. You were simply often sick, and that was that. Now, sanitation. If you lived in a poor district, forget about plumbing. No drains, no pipes. What you produced at night was dumped from the window in the morning. And you weren't alone. Everyone did it. The stench in the streets was normal. Waste pooled in corners. Sewers existed only in central areas and elite homes. Everyone else just managed however they could. And then there were the rats, flies, mosquitoes. Today you install screens, call pest control, take out the trash. Back then, you lived with the trash. It was dumped in the courtyard. It stank. It attracted parasites. And that meant intestinal infections, skin diseases, constant epidemics. plague, dysentery, typhoid, all of it, part of everyday life. Drinking water, that's a topic in itself. The aqueducts bring water to the city, but not to your home. There's no faucet, no filter. You walk to a public fountain and fill a clay jug. The water is warm, has a film on it, sometimes cloudy. If you don't boil it, and you might not even own a pot to boil with, you just drink it as is. Want a comparison? Today, you drink filtered water from a bottle. Back then, you drank and hoped it wouldn't kill you. You begin to understand. Climate and environment aren't just the backdrop. They are active forces shaping your life every single day. They decide how you sleep, what you wear, how long you live. Rome didn't let the weak survive. Those who did survive knew how to find shade, how to shelter from the rain, where to get clean water, and how to shield their breath from the smoke. And if today we argue about global warming, waste management, or air quality, in Rome, you wouldn't even dream of such conversations. You'd just be trying to make it to the next morning through heat, dust, and smoke. If you lived in ancient Rome, your first question wouldn't be, where can I work? But where can I sleep without dying in the night? Because shelter wasn't just a roof over your head. It was your security, your status, your tiny world inside a loud, crowded, brutal metropolis. You don't browse listings online, read reviews, or watch YouTube walkthroughs. You don't have a real estate agent. You have rumors, connections, and maybe a bit of luck. Often, not even that. If you're rich, you live in a domus, a private house with an inner courtyard, garden, marble floors, and mosaic walls. Space, silence, frescoes, fountains in the atrium. You wake to the sound of birds in your peristyle. You have servants, a kitchen, a private library, even a shrine for household gods. Your door opens onto the street, and you don't hear your neighbor coughing. But if you're poor, and let's be honest, you probably are, you live in an insula, a tenement building. Don't imagine a modern apartment block. Insulae were built quickly, cheaply, and without much oversight. Brick and timber, sometimes mud and plaster. Fires and collapses were common. That's not a metaphor. Entire neighborhoods went up in flames. Sometimes, the whole city. Nero didn't invent arson. He just wasn't the only one capable of it. There are no elevators. If you live on the 5th floor, you climb it every day, up a narrow, steep, slippery staircase. Each floor means a drop in rent. The higher you go, the cheaper it gets, and the more dangerous. The top floors collapse first. You might just be unlucky. You fall asleep and don't wake up because the ceiling came down in the night. And no one will sue the landlord. He has friends. You have bruises. Top floors often had no running water, no toilets. You carry water yourself, in buckets, from the nearest fountain. The toilet? On the ground floor, or just a clay pot. And then you dump it out of the window. It's not barbarism. It's daily life. Today you have plumbing, flush toilets, sewage systems. Back then, you had a warning shout, "Watch out!" and a splash in the street below. Insulae were overcrowded. One room might hold several people, family, neighbors, boarders. The air, stale. Noise from the street, smells of food, smoke, urine, wine. You sleep on a straw mattress or bare wooden planks. No pillow, no heating, sweltering in summer, freezing in winter. Mold, your roommate. Craving solitude? It doesn't exist. Personal space? Ends at your elbow. You don't have a kitchen, and you don't cook at home. It's too dangerous. Fire is the enemy. Everyone fears lighting a flame. You buy hot food on the street. Pots, stoves, charcoal. Those are luxuries. And windows? Maybe you have one, without glass, just wooden shutters. That means mosquitoes, dust, and other people's shouting. Still, the insulae are the city's beating heart. This is where workers live. Shopkeepers, teachers, craftsmen, actors, prostitutes. Life pulses here. Everyone knows everyone. Gossip, fights, help, arguments, it's all mixed together. A living organism. And despite the risk, you can survive here if you're careful. Ownership? Rare. You rent. There are no contracts, only verbal deals. The landlord can raise the price, evict you, ignore repairs. Today, you file a complaint. Back then, you just leave and look for somewhere else, or stay and endure, because there's likely nothing better. And if you're a slave, you don't rent, you don't buy, you sleep where your master tells you, in a basement, in the kitchen, in a storage room, sometimes with animals, sometimes just on the floor. Now you see, in Rome, housing is a trial. And if today you're choosing between tile and hardwood, back then you'd be praying the roof didn't collapse on your head. If you lived in ancient Rome, appearance wasn't just about style. It was your passport, your resume, your business card. People read your status, profession, and origins in your tunic, your hairstyle, even your smell. Today, you might wear a hoodie, sneakers, or a suit, depending on your mood. Back then, your clothes strictly dictated who you were and who people had the right to think you were. You can't just wear what you like. Fabric is expensive. Most of your clothes are wool or linen, coarse, itchy, poorly dyed. The palette is narrow, gray, brown, off-white. Bright dyes are for the wealthy. Purple means power. A purple stripe on your toga. You're a senator. A toga entirely purple. You're the emperor. Walk the street in color you haven't earned, and people will question you. Sometimes punish you. An ordinary Roman wears a tunic, a simple rectangular shirt belted at the waist. 2 holes for arms, 1 for your head. That's it. To work, tunic. To the market, tunic. To bed, same tunic. Shoes, sandals, or bare feet. No second pair, no wardrobe choices. In winter, you throw a cloak over it. There's no thermal gear. You just shiver. Women's clothing is more complex, but not more free. A tunic with a stola over it, a wide, draped dress. Sometimes a palla, a shawl, or wrap. Color is strictly regulated. Widows, for instance, wear muted tones. Hair? Incredibly important. Women of status build architectural wonders on their heads. It's a symbol of wealth. You have slaves who style you. If you're poor, you have a braid tied in a knot. Hygiene? Don't romanticize it. Yes, Romans were cleanliness obsessed, but not in the modern sense. There's no hot shower in the morning, no shampoo, no deodorant, no cotton swabs. There's a basin, water from a well, olive oil, and a scraper, the strigil. That's how you clean off sweat and dirt. That's it. If you're wealthy, you go to the baths, the thermae, hot air, pools, massages, conversation. It's not just hygiene, it's ritual. But soap, as we know it, barely exists. And the water? Often far from clean. The baths are breeding grounds for disease, lice, fungus. You're sharing water with dozens of sweating bodies. And yet, this is the height of urban luxury. You probably don't have access to it. You don't own a toothbrush. You clean your teeth with a twig, chalk powder, or even ash. Bad breath? Totally normal. Perfume? More like aromatic oils. And they're used more to mask the stench than to smell good. Shaving is rare. Men often wear beards or mustaches. Razors are crude. There are barbers who'll shave you for a coin, but it's risky. Cuts, infections. Haircuts are done with shears, blunt and awkward. Women's hygiene, a brutal topic. No pads, no underwear, as we understand it. Cloth, wool, sometimes just endurance. Infections, inflammation, skin diseases. That's reality. Makeup? It exists. White lead powder, red ochre, charcoal. All of it toxic. But if you want to look refined, you paint your face, even if it kills you slowly. And still, despite it all, appearance matters deeply. Washing your face in the morning, expected. Brushing off your tunic, scrubbing out stains, polishing your sandals. If you can, do it. You step out into the city, like onto a stage. People look. People whisper. People judge. If you lived back then, you'd understand. Looking respectable is survival. Because a smell, a stain, an uneven beard, or dirty fingernails might not just ruin your day. They might get you rejected, mocked, humiliated. Your appearance is your armor and your passport to society. If you lived in ancient Rome, food wouldn't be a scheduled pleasure. It was a social, cultural, even political act. Today, you've got a fridge, a grocery store 5 minutes away, a food court, home delivery, and vitamins in pills. Back then, you survived between the market, your neighbor, the weather, and your social rank. In the morning, there's no omelet, coffee, or croissant. The Roman breakfast, ientaculum, is a tiny affair. A bit of bread, maybe with honey. If you're lucky, some cheese or olives. No hot dishes, no coffee. It hasn't been invented. You grab a quick bite and move on. Work awaits. Trades, courts, duties. Prandium, lunch, is a light snack. Fruit, nuts, cold leftovers, yesterday's meat, if you have any. Eating alone is normal. No one hosts midday feasts. It's a pause, not a celebration. The real moment comes in the evening. Cena, the main ritual of the day. Among the rich, it's theater. Reclining on cushions, in company, with servants. Meat, vegetables, fish, wine, sauces, desserts, all beautifully plated, served in bronze, silver, glass. Among the poor, it's simpler: bread, porridge, maybe a vegetable stew. Meat is rare. Chicken or pork is a treat, not a staple. Beef, almost unheard of. Oxen are for labor, not for eating. You get used to bread. It's the foundation. Rome has state-run bakeries and free bread distribution for the poor, an early form of social welfare. If you're a citizen, you might receive your loaf for nothing. Bread comes in many forms: wheat, barley, with herbs or oil mixed in. In Pompeii, archaeologists found hundreds of petrified loaves, each stamped with the bakery's mark. You don't know sugar. It hasn't reached Europe yet. Sweetness comes from honey, fruit, raisins, grapes. Like spices? Then you'd better pay. Pepper, cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, all imported from India and the Arab world. They're expensive, prized on the market like gold. The most bizarre staple on every Roman table is garum, a fermented fish sauce with a stench somewhere between soy sauce, Worcestershire, and something that went bad a month ago. They pour it on everything: meat, porridge, soup, eggs. The smell of production alone carries for miles, but demand never drops. Garum factories dot the coastlines of Spain, Gaul, North Africa. It reeks. It sells. Vegetables are crucial: cabbage, beans, onions, garlic, cucumbers, turnips. No potatoes, no tomatoes, no corn. Those won't arrive for another 1,500 years. Fruit includes figs, apples, pears, quinces, pomegranates, grapes. Cooking is simple: boiling, frying, stewing. Vinegar and honey, sometimes together. Romans love bold, strange flavors. Milk? Rare. If you do drink it, it's probably goat milk, a poor man's drink. The wealthy see it as rustic. Butter? No. They use olive oil. No yogurt, no cottage cheese, no sour cream in any modern sense. Meat? If you're lucky, poultry, pork, wild game. Sometimes flamingo, crane, hedgehog, dormice, lark tongues. That's not a joke. The rich compete in exotic dishes. One recipe calls for roast peacock, feathers reattached after cooking. Another, dormouse, stuffed with nuts and honey, then stewed. The markets, Masella, are loud, filthy, teeming with life. The smell of fish, blood, sweat, oil. Sellers shout, bargain, cheat. Butchers, fishmongers, grocers, spice sellers, vegetable stalls. No packaging, no refrigeration. Everything's laid out bare. Buyers smell, prod, taste. Flies buzz overhead. But if you've got money, you can find anything. Egyptian dates, British oysters, most important of all, water. Rome is fed by dozens of aqueducts, bringing water into the city. Fountains, bathhouses, private homes, public buildings, all depend on them. But you don't have a tap. You walk to a fountain with buckets or pay a water carrier. Water quality varies. In rich areas, clear and fresh. In poor ones, stagnant, cloudy, lukewarm. No filters, no boiling. Waterborne disease is common, especially in summer. So people grow used to drinking wine. It's safer. But don't picture strong drinks. Roman wine is diluted, heavily. Drinking it straight is seen as barbaric. Real wine drinkers cut it with water. Stronger than 9–10%? Uncivilized. Undiluted wine is for savages and drunks. There's hot spiced wine, mulsum, and sour, half-fermented wine, vinum acerbum. Wine can be infused with herbs, honey, even roses. Jars are sealed with wax. Barrels? Not yet. They haven't been invented. Beer? That's for barbarians. Romans find it repulsive. But in the northern provinces, Britain, Germania, they brew it. In the empire's southern heartlands, beer is scorned. Dairy products? Rare and quick to spoil. Goat milk is given to children. Adults mostly drink water, wine, or herbal infusions. Tea, coffee, cocoa, none of them exist. You begin to understand food in Rome is a balancing act between status, circumstance, and chance. No fridge, so you buy daily. No packaging. Food is wrapped in cloth or leaves. No microwave. Your meal goes cold, and you eat it that way. Food is a ritual, a social signal, a political act. The flavors are wild by modern standards, but you'd either adapt or starve. If you lived in ancient Rome, your passport, your bank account, your diploma, your network, even your appearance, none of that would matter as much as one simple question. What is your class? Because everything, from the bread you eat to the punishment you face, hinges on your place in a rigid, near immovable hierarchy, where everyone knows exactly who they are and whom they must bow to. Today, you might be born poor and die a billionaire. Back then, the social ladder was more like a trapdoor staircase. Very few climbed it, and rarely with anyone's blessing. A patrician isn't just a rich man. He is born into one of the old houses, names echoing back to the Republic's dawn. To be patrician is to belong by blood to Rome's nobility. You might become senator, consul, praetor. You wear the purple-bordered toga. You speak in the Senate. You judge, command, dictate. You do not work with your hands. That would be shameful. You manage lands, conduct business through slaves and clients. You own dozens of slaves, estates in Campania, tenant farmers, trade routes, voters, and powerful allies. On the street, people recognize you. They greet you. They step aside. You wear a brilliant white toga a poor man wouldn't dare to glance at. If you're not a patrician, you're probably a plebeian, a free Roman citizen. You can vote, serve in the army, own property, run a shop. But you lack a pedigree, no ancient name. You're a craftsman, a trader, a farmer, a builder, a soldier. You're barred from the highest offices. You're not welcome in the inner circles. But you can grow rich. Hard work earns you respect. And yet, you might still be mocked, pushed aside, ignored. You're a cog, not a gear. You queue for grain, argue with neighbors over space at the market, plant beans on rented land. You are the empire's backbone, and no one thanks you for it. Now imagine this. You were once a slave, but your master freed you. You became a libertus, a freedman. That puts you in a strange place. You're no longer property, but you're not quite a full citizen either. You can't be a senator. Your children, yes, they can. But you, no. Often, you still owe work and loyalty to your former master. He is your patron. You are his client. You owe him support, service, respect. If he calls, you must come. If he demands money, goods, labor, you don't argue. But you are free. You can marry, start a business, walk the streets with your head held high. Many freedmen become wealthy, especially in trade, crafts, managing villas. Some are fabulously rich. Yet to a patrician, you're always a former slave. That mark never washes away. And finally, the slave. You are property, not a person. You don't have a real name, only a nickname. You can't marry. You have no family. Your body belongs to your master. He can sell you, punish you, kill you, with no consequence. You wake before everyone, sleep after everyone. You wash, carry, build, cook, watch children, haul water, copy scrolls. You are the absolute majority of the city. In big houses, dozens of slaves. In Roman villas, hundreds. On plantations, thousands. There are slaves who are craftsmen, teachers, doctors, scribes. Some are highly educated. Greek philosophers sold as household decorations. Some fight in the arena. Some are just meat. Slavery is not about race. You can be Greek, Gaul, Thracian, Egyptian, Germanic. You might have been captured in battle, sold by your family, born into slavery. You are branded, humiliated, inspected like merchandise, teeth, skin, muscles. Slave, the harshest fate. If you are a slave, your life is worth less than a dog's. And yet, sometimes you are freed. Sometimes you can buy your freedom. Sometimes luck smiles on you. But most often, you die as you lived, nameless, in the shadows. Such was the world of ancient Rome, a ruthless hierarchy. Justice? No. Mobility? Barely. Opportunity? Only if you can navigate the currents, and only if you are free. If not, you are simply part of the city's mass. Furniture. Statistics. If you lived in ancient Rome, your family would not be a cell of society as we think of it today. It would be more like a miniature clan with an iron hierarchy, where love is a pleasant bonus, but not a must-have. The main figure wasn't the husband, nor the wife, nor the elder brother, nor the grandmother. The main figure was the paterfamilias, the father of the family. His power was absolute. Today you have the right to choose, to marry or not, to love or not, to decide where to live and how to raise your children. In Rome, your life is subject to the will of one man, your father. He decides whom you marry, what money you receive, what career you start. He can acknowledge your children, or refuse to. He can even sell you into slavery if you are his son or daughter, and still officially under his authority. He can execute you for a misdeed, and no one will intervene. The family is a hierarchy, not a partnership. The hierarchy begins at birth. You are not simply a family member. You are a subordinate within the system. Women in Rome do not vote, do not serve, and do not hold official positions. They are on the periphery of public life. But that does not mean they are without influence. A wealthy Roman woman has servants, jewelry, personal income. She can own property, manage the household, interfere in her husband's affairs, and sometimes even in state matters through him. Women arrange dynastic marriages, lobby for their sons' careers, correspond with others, and make donations to temples. However, all this is within limits set by the male world. If you are a woman, you live under constant control. Before marriage, you are under your father's authority. In marriage, you are under your husband's. As a widow, you have a guardian. Only a few women, especially from wealthy or imperial circles, could break out of this cycle. The Roman marriage is a contract. Love might happen, but more often it happens in poetry than in the bedroom. The family aims to strengthen its position, secure alliances, and combine wealth. As a result, you might be married off at 14, and this will not be your choice, but your duty. The wedding is a grand, festive occasion. The bride is led through the streets, holding torches, flowers, and amulets. But the romance ends quickly. The wife's role is to bear heirs and manage the household. If you cannot, you become a burden. If you argue, you cause problems. A good wife is invisible. However, marriages are not forever. Divorce in Rome is frequent and even commonplace. A statement from one party is enough. Reasons? Lack of children, adultery, political necessity. Property is divided, but with minimal protection for the weaker party. You might be married 3 times in your life, and each time not for love. If you are born, that is already luck. Many infants died in the first weeks. Romans did not believe all children had equal value. If the father did not officially accept the baby through a symbolic ritual of lifting, the child might be abandoned by the roadside. Upbringing is strict, especially for boys. Girls are prepared for marriage, boys for service. The ideal child is obedient, noble, strong. You won't have soft toys, kindergarten, or the right to make mistakes. But you will have teachers, slaves, tutors, rods for punishment, and stern speeches about duty to Rome. And yet, there was logic in this system. The family is your insurance, your protection, your bank, your advocate. Kinship ties are more important than diplomas. If your father is a senator, you have a chance. If your father is a cobbler, you will have a hard time. And if you are a woman, a slave, or a freedman, your survival in Rome will depend not only on hard work, but also on how well you can walk the thin line between dependence and opportunity. If you lived in ancient Rome, you'd quickly understand one simple truth. Surviving here means knowing not just who you are, but who stands behind you. Even if you're free, even if you own a small shop or practice a craft, that alone won't be enough. Rome is no place for lone wolves. To have protection, advancement, and sometimes even food, you need a patron. And you, a client. This is an unspoken but absolute system, like an invisible web running alongside law and society. You won't find it in official records or job lists, but you'll feel it everywhere. In the grain line, the court, the marketplace, the temple. If you don't have a patron, you're in danger. A patron can be anyone: a senator, a wealthy landowner, a former consul, or simply a successful citizen. He is your protector, your advocate. He can speak on your behalf, help you find work, lend money, or support you in court. Today, you might go to social services or a lawyer. Then, you went to your patron. But this help isn't free. You don't pay with money. You pay with loyalty. Every morning, you show up at his house, greet him in front of others, follow him to the forum, applaud at his speeches as instructed. Sometimes you carry his litter, sometimes deliver petitions, sometimes just stand with a serious face in his entourage to create an aura of power. These morning visits were called salutatio. Imagine, early morning, cold and damp, standing in line outside your patron's door with dozens of other clients. His steward calls out names. You enter, bow, say a few words. If you're lucky, you get a basket of food or some small cash, the sportula. In return, your devotion. Today, it would look like a mix of politics, PR, and lobbying, but without the internet or legal guarantees. It's all built on trust, fear, and habit. You need a patron, and the patron needs an army of grateful clients, especially during elections, disputes, and in the crowd. Sometimes the relationship turns friendly. Sometimes it's harsh exploitation. The patron may demand too much or humiliate you, but you come anyway, because there's no other way. Clientela is your insurance against illness, court troubles, and hunger. Even the rich had patrons, even more powerful ones. The chain never ends. And at the very top, the emperor, who has no one above him. This system of patronage permeated not just daily life, but culture. At the theater, applause followed the patron's command. In court, speeches were backed by crowds of clients. In the army, promotions came through recommendations. Even the gods, in Roman minds, were like higher patrons, approached with rituals, honor, and promises. You might be a humble craftsman, but if you have a powerful patron, people respect you. Or you could be a rich man without backing, and your voice means nothing. In Rome, everything depends on connections. Without them, you are nobody. But with them, you can be anyone. If you lived in ancient Rome, your life's path would depend far less on talent and far more on the family you were born into. Let's be clear. In this society, social mobility was almost a myth. If you were the son of a slave, no one expected you to become an orator. If you were the son of a senator, no one imagined you hammering horseshoes. Education and career were simply extensions of your origins. Access to education was a privilege, not a right. Poor children, especially those from craftsmen or shopkeeper families, often began helping in workshops, markets, or fields from a young age. But the son of a wealthy citizen had another path, the path of a pupil, student, rhetorician, perhaps even senator. The first stage was learning reading, writing, and basic arithmetic from a literator. Think of it as primary school, but without desks or recess. Children sat on benches or directly on the floor, writing with a stylus on wax tablets. Made a mistake? You got a poke. Repeated it? You got a beating. A stroke, like a comma, was placed where needed to help understanding. Teachers were often slaves or freedmen, frequently strict, educated, but poorly paid. Many students memorized lessons without truly understanding them. After all, books were nearly non-existent. Next level, schooling with a grammaticus, where you studied poetry, mythology, and grammar. The main goal was to learn how to reason elegantly and quote Homer or Virgil by heart. Imagine a teenager dissecting ancient Greek dramas in a dusty room smelling of ink, wax, and sweat. Back then, students copied work too, not from phones, but from their neighbors' tablets. The highest tier, training with a rhetor. This was the elite. Here, you learned not just to speak, but to speak persuasively, theatrically, with passion. You practiced delivering speeches before tribunes, in courts, at funerals, and in the Senate. The key was to control the audience's emotions, draw examples from history, and appeal to honor and ancestral glory. Today, you'd study presentation skills, TED Talks, and debate. Then, you learned to strike a speech like lightning and finish it with a catharsis worthy of tragedy. But however eloquent you were, without connections, you wouldn't build a career. Rome was a club, not just elite, but tightly sealed. To become a judge, official, or senator, you had to be not only a free, educated, wealthy man, but also have the right friends, relatives, and patrons. A political career was not a path. It was a labyrinth paved with gold coins. Every promotion came through elections, decided not so much by votes, but by the number of your clients, promises, donations, and charisma. You might spend as much on your campaign as modern candidates do on election tours in the USA. Officially, bribery was banned. But in practice, candidates treated crowds to meals, organized games, and donated to temples. People remembered generosity. Enemies remembered dirt. Yes, there were ancient leaks, rumors, denunciations, public mockery, and ridicule in inscriptions and plays. Politics was a stage, and you were in the spotlight. If you didn't know how to play the part, you lost. The alternative was the army. For the poor, a soldier's path, risky, but with a chance for glory and reward. For the wealthy, the path of an officer or commander, where success on the battlefield became a platform for a political career. Caesar, Pompey, Trajan, all started as soldiers and ended at the pinnacle of power. But remember, lose the loyalty of your legions, and you lose everything. The army obeyed not Rome, but the general. A terrifying and mighty force. If you were a craftsman, your career was simpler. You learned from your father or master, joined a guild, built a reputation. If you were a merchant, you made deals, transported goods from the east, prayed to Mercury. But no matter how hard you worked, you would never become a senator. There was no place in the Senate for those who work with their hands. But there was one back door: wealth and influence. Especially if you were a freedman. You could become rich, open a bathhouse, shop, workshop, and even influence city affairs. Some former slaves became super rich because they were useful to the elite in trade, finance, event organizing, sometimes more influential than citizens. So, education in Rome was not just knowledge. It was a key to a lock that only a chosen dynasty could open. And career was not just labor. It was a game where you had to be cunning, generous, a little cynical, and very attentive to who was watching you from the stands. If you lived in ancient Rome, you lived in a state where law was the pride of the nation, a tool of power, and a mirror of social hierarchy. Even today, Western legal systems carry traces of Roman law. But in Rome itself, justice was not always equality. It was a game with strict rules. But the survivor was the one with influence, knowledge of procedures, and good connections. The Romans codified laws as early as the 5th century BCE, starting with the Law of the 12 Tables. These tables, displayed in the Forum, were the first step toward legal transparency. Now, every citizen theoretically knew what was allowed and what was forbidden. Compare that to today. You Google what to do after a car accident. Then, you went to the forum to read the rules scratched into bronze. Or, if you were illiterate, you asked friends. But access to justice was a privilege of citizens. And that's important. Not all free people were citizens, and far fewer had equal access to the courts. Slaves had no rights and were objects, not subjects of law. Freedmen had limited opportunities. Full legal proceedings were for those written into the Republic's body. If accused, your fate depended on the case type. There were private lawsuits, debts, damaged property, divorce, and criminal cases, from murder to treason. Trials took place outdoors, in basilicas, or right on the forum, where anyone could watch. It was justice and spectacle. Judges were not lawyers, but magistrates or senators. Your speech mattered hugely. How you performed, how you presented yourself. Guilty or just an unlucky, slandered Roman? The catch was that punishments varied widely, depending on your status. For the rich, usually fines. For the poor, flogging, hard labor, or even execution. Killing a citizen without trial was forbidden, but only if he was a citizen. Slaves, on the other hand, could be executed without formalities. Moreover, if a slave killed his master, all slaves in the household were executed, regardless of guilt. Collective responsibility as a tool of terror. Some punishments sound barbaric by today's standards. For example, throwing a criminal into a river inside a sack containing snakes, a dog, a rooster, and a monkey. This was an ancient punishment for parricide. The judges believed that a traitor to the family deserved a terrible and symbolic death. Still, there was a system of appeals. You could challenge a court decision, but only if you had the resources. It cost time, money, and connections. Emperor Augustus, for instance, personally heard appeals. But getting an audience with him was like getting a meeting with a head of state today. Only a few succeeded. The rest waited. Sometimes for years. Court trials became a popular part of public life. On certain days, crowds didn't go to the theater. They went to the forum to listen to orators and watch the drama unfold. Famous advocates like Cicero were almost like showbiz stars. Their speeches were performances, full of pauses, tears, and quotes from poets. Crying in court was normal. It showed sincerity. If you lived back then and decided to sue your neighbor over a property boundary, you'd spend weeks, maybe months. First, hire a patron or lawyer. Then, find a judge. Next, wait for the hearing. All without any guarantee of success. But if you won, you were a hero. And losing could mean not just shame, but loss of property, freedom, or life. Romans saw law as the foundation of society. Law wasn't just text. It was part of identity. Even in its harshest forms, it was better than arbitrariness. Because if you had knowledge, a voice, and support, you could sometimes win even against a powerful enemy. But more often, victory went to whoever had the best patron and the loudest voice in the forum. If you lived in ancient Rome, especially in its densely populated parts, say, somewhere in the cramped quarters of Trastevere or the Subura, you'd fear not only criminals, but also fire. Fire was perhaps the city's greatest enemy, and the main reason for the early form of an urban rescue service. Fires in Rome were frequent and sudden. The cause? Building materials. Most poor people's homes, insula, were made of wood, with beams and straw roofing, often with primitive hearths inside the rooms. Dense construction, narrow streets, no fire regulations. All this turned neighborhoods into tinder boxes. Fire jumped from floor to floor, from house to house, until the entire district became a blazing sea of heat and ash. Today, if your apartment catches fire, you call the firefighters and evacuate according to a plan. In Rome, before the reign of Emperor Octavian Augustus, there was no official firefighting service at all. People had to extinguish fires themselves, with buckets, sand, and prayers. August decided to change this and created the Vigiles, the first organized night watch and fire brigade in history. They could be described as a mix of firefighters and local police. About 7,000 men divided into cohorts, each responsible for a district of Rome. Their duties were twofold. By day, maintaining order; by night, putting out fires and preventing crimes. They weren't armed with swords, but with hooks, axes, and leather buckets. In a major fire, the Vigiles organized human chains from wells, doused flames with vinegar, or simply knocked down neighboring buildings to stop the fire from spreading. Yes, sometimes saving the city meant destroying parts of it. They even used amphorae filled with vinegar for extinguishing. It was believed to be more effective than water. But don't think the Vigiles were perfect heroes. Sometimes they were bribed. Sometimes they did nothing. And quite often they even took part in looting under the cover of the fire. People used to say, first comes the fire, then the Vigiles, and only after that, hope. Besides putting out fires, the Vigiles patrolled the streets, especially at night. Crime in Rome was dark and dangerous business. Robberies, assaults, rapes, street gangs, particularly in poor neighborhoods where the law was just a formality. The streets could be more dangerous than a battlefield. At night, patrols went out with lanterns and clubs. Their job was to stop suspicious people, check documents. Yes, citizens carried identification, and enforce the curfew. Sometimes they'd file a report on a wooden tablet. Sometimes just let people go. Poor Romans hung talismans over their doors to ward off thieves and prayed to guardian gods like the Lares and the Penates. The wealthy hired personal guards or slave doorkeepers, ostiarii, and in special cases, even gladiators served as bodyguards. Riots, popular unrest, nighttime gatherings, all of this was suppressed by the vigiles and the city's cohort of praetorians if things got really serious. But minor crimes often went unpunished. If you were robbed in a back alley, chances of recovering your belongings were slim, unless you knew the criminal by face and could track them down yourself. So, safety in Rome depended less on the service and more on your social status, where you lived, and your luck. The closer you were to the city center, the higher your place on the social ladder, the safer you were. Living on the outskirts, among merchants and craftsmen, you had to rely on friends and strong locks. And if you suddenly woke up to the smell of smoke, don't call the fire brigade. Run. Fast. And pray the vigils are nearby and sober. If you lived in ancient Rome, serving in the army was one of the most important and influential parts of life, especially if you were a provincial dreaming of becoming a citizen. The Roman army wasn't just a military force. It was a machine of social mobility, discipline, and state power. For most provincials, where Roman citizenship was a privilege, service in the legions became the path to full citizen status. Soldiers who weren't Roman by birth were accepted into the legions, and after 25 years of service, gained civil rights and land allotments, a form of social support and reward. Today, you have your passport and registration. Back then, serving in the army was your ticket to a full Roman life. Discipline in the legion was relentless and harsh. Every legionary lived by strict rules, marching in formation, daily drills, a rigid schedule, and absolute obedience to orders. Desertion was considered the greatest crime, punishable by death. Flogging and fines were common penalties, even for the smallest offenses. Imagine, today you might get fined for skipping work, but in the legion, you could be executed or crucified. Soldiers wore standard gear, heavy armor, helmets, shields, and swords, all bulky and uncomfortable, especially in the heat. But it was this equipment that made the Roman legion an unbeatable machine on the battlefield. You would train daily wearing that armor, march dozens of kilometers, live in camps with straw and grass on the ground, often far from family and home. After many years of service, you'd receive a pension and a land allotment, one of the most valuable rewards. Land in the colonies gave you the chance to live independently, farm, and provide for your family. But these plots were often in remote or newly conquered territories, so life there could be tough and dangerous. Serving in the army was not just a duty, but a pride. Being a legionary meant having the right to defend the empire and the chance to climb the social ladder. Many prominent politicians, including Julius Caesar, began their careers in the military. But be prepared. The Roman army was no romantic tale of heroic deeds. It was brutal daily discipline, constant danger, and service pushing human limits, all for the sake of earning citizenship, a pension, and maybe starting a new life afterward. In ancient Rome, entertainment wasn't just a way to pass time. It was a vital part of social life and a tool of political influence. If you lived then, you could attend theaters and amphitheaters filled with drama, excitement, and vivid emotions, experiences comparable today to attending a major sports event or a celebrity concert. Roman theaters hosted comedies, tragedies, pantomimes, and musical performances. Built with careful attention to acoustics, they could hold thousands of spectators. Shows were accessible to nearly all social classes, as tickets were usually free, unlike many modern theaters, where tickets can be a significant expense. But free didn't mean equal. Seating was strictly divided by social rank. Patricians and senators sat in the best spots right by the stage, while plebeians were relegated to the upper tiers. The grandest entertainment venue was, of course, the Colosseum, an amphitheater that could hold up to 50,000 spectators. It was a massive arena, the heart of public spectacles and a symbol of Rome's power. Imagine, today's largest stadiums can hold about the same number of people. Yet the Romans built this monument without modern technology, using only stone, concrete, and arches. At the Colosseum, a variety of spectacles took place. The most popular were gladiatorial games, bloody, spectacular duels involving slaves, prisoners of war, or volunteers. Gladiators often became heroes of the people. Their names echoed throughout the city, and victories brought them fame and wealth. But be certain, behind every fight was cruelty and deadly risk. Not all gladiators survived until the end of the show. Besides gladiator fights, there were wild beast hunts, venaciones. Lions, tigers, elephants, and other exotic animals, brought from the far corners of the empire, were released into the arena. These beasts often fought against warriors or each other, creating a true circus spectacle. Sometimes, naval battles were staged in the Colosseum. The arena would be flooded with water, and ships would sail on it. All these events had not only entertainment, but also political significance. Emperors and wealthy patricians organized games and shows to gain popularity with the people. Free tickets, food, and wine during performances were ways to maintain peace and order in the city. Bread and circuses, as the ancients said. Visiting the theater or amphitheater was also an important social function. Friends met, new acquaintances were made, and news was discussed. Romans knew how to have a loud and lively rest, and the spectacles often lasted the entire day, starting in the morning and ending in the evening. Unlike modern cinema or theater, where viewers are usually passive consumers, in Rome, the atmosphere was lively and noisy. The crowd shouted, whistled, and cheered for their favorite heroes. The winner received laurels and gifts, while the loser did not always leave the arena alive. Thus, theaters and amphitheaters were the center of Roman urban life, uniting residents of different social layers in a common, festive spectacle that combined art, sport, and harsh reality. If you had the chance, attending these events would be your window into the soul of the ancient metropolis. In ancient Rome, theaters and amphitheaters were not just entertainment venues. They were true centers of public life, where politics, culture, and social relations intersected. If you lived then, visiting these places would be an integral part of your life, as Romans literally lived by bread and circuses, panem et circenses, the free shows arranged for the people. Roman theaters were typically semicircular buildings with stone or wooden benches arranged amphitheatrically around the stage. Performances lasted several hours, sometimes the whole day, with breaks for lunch and snacks. Romans enjoyed tragedies, comedies, and pantomimes, silent dance and drama performances where emotions were conveyed through gestures and facial expressions. Sometimes plays were accompanied by live music. Theaters accommodated from a few thousand to 15,000 spectators, but the main arena for mass entertainment was the Colosseum, a grand amphitheater built in the 1st century AD. It could hold up to 50,000 people, comparable to today's largest stadiums. Its architecture impressed not only with size, but also with technical innovations. The Colosseum had up to 80 entrances, allowing quick seating and evacuation, and the arena was equipped with a complex system of lifts and tunnels for the release of beasts and gladiators. Tickets to the spectacles were free, making them accessible to almost all city residents, from patricians to the poor. However, seating was strictly distributed according to social hierarchy. Senators and the high nobility sat closest to the arena, while the common people watched the fights and performances from the upper tiers, which were often uncomfortable and hot. On these upper rows, collapses sometimes occurred due to poor construction and the crowd's weight. The main attraction that drew thousands of Romans to the amphitheaters was gladiatorial combat. Gladiators were professional fighters, often slaves or prisoners of war, but sometimes volunteers who trained for years to master weapons and acrobatics. The fights were a true spectacle of life and death. Spectators placed bets, cheered their favorites, and rejoiced in their victories. An interesting fact: some gladiators became celebrities, earning huge sums, and sometimes even won their freedom, later becoming trainers or fight organizers. Besides fights, there were venations, hunts of wild animals. Lions, tigers, bears, rhinos, and even elephants were brought to the Colosseum from the farthest corners of the empire. These beasts fought gladiators or each other, creating incredible spectacles. Sometimes the Romans staged naval battles, flooding the arena with water. Such events were called naumachia. For these, they built special waterproof arenas or temporarily blocked the drainage systems. Noise, screams, and the smell of blood filled the air. Spectators didn't just watch passively, but actively influenced the outcome, showing thumbs up or down to decide the fate of the defeated. This direct democracy in the arena was an integral part of Roman culture. Organizing such events required huge resources. Hundreds of slaves and workers served the arena, maintained order, and cared for animals and gladiators. Emperors and wealthy patrons invested enormous sums into the games, holding them not just for entertainment, but as a political tool to keep the people submissive and demonstrate their generosity. Overall, theaters and amphitheaters were places where art, sport, and politics merged, reflecting all the complexity and contrasts of Roman civilization. If you lived then, attending these spectacles would give you not only entertainment, but also a chance to feel the pulse of the ancient metropolis and understand how power interacted with the people through spectacular forms. One of the most popular and thrilling entertainments in ancient Rome was chariot racing, held at the grand arena called the Circus Maximus. If you lived then, you surely couldn't miss this place, where every racer and team inspired true fanaticism among thousands of spectators. The Circus Maximus was a giant arena holding up to 250,000 people, several times more than the largest modern football stadium. Imagine a sea of people gathered in a huge, elongated area with a long, straight track and a towering stone spina, in the middle, along which charioteers raced at breakneck speed. The main spectacle was the chariot races, in which teams, or factions, participated. There were 4 of them: the reds, whites, greens, and blues. These factions had their own fans, sponsors, and even political influence. Supporters passionately cheered for their colors, and during heated moments, street fights and riots sometimes broke out, which was a serious problem for the Roman authorities. These factions were much like today's football clubs with loyal fans and fierce rivalries. Chariot races were not just a sport, but a true gambling entertainment. Betting played a huge role. Both rich and poor placed wagers on their favorites, and the sums could be impressive. According to some sources, in the biggest races, total winnings and losses reached colossal amounts, affecting the city's economy and daily life. The most famous charioteers were real stars. Their names were widely known in society, and victory brought huge fame and money. But the races were deadly dangerous. Speed, a bunch of wooden chariots, heavy horses, tight turns, all this made each race a game of survival. Frequent crashes, falls, and even deaths of racers did not deter the crowd. On the contrary, it only fueled the excitement. One particularly striking fact: to add spectacle and make the race harder for the drivers, sculptures and monuments were placed along the spina, the central barrier of the arena, and special structures were set up at the turns, which had to be circled, making the corners especially dangerous. For comparison, modern car races also have markings and restrictions, but the Romans had no modern safety systems. Everything depended on skill and luck. The Circus Maximus, although originally built of wood in early times, was rebuilt and modernized several times. Its final version was made of stone and featured complex engineering solutions for crowd control, spectator safety, and even lighting. Torches were used during night races. Attending the races was almost a religious event for Romans. It was not only an opportunity to entertain themselves, but also to meet friends, discuss news, show loyalty to their faction, and feel part of the huge, living organism of the city. Thus, chariot races at the Circus Maximus were among the largest and most vivid events in ancient Rome, combining sport, gambling, politics, and social life into one unforgettable spectacle. In ancient Rome, festivals and holidays were not just dates on the calendar. They were true bursts of life, when the entire city was immersed in an atmosphere of joy, religious rituals, and social change. If you lived back then, these days would become a real celebration of soul and body, when ordinary rules and worries took a back seat. One of the most famous and grand festivals was the Saturnalia, dedicated to the god Saturn. Imagine living in a world where, for several days, the entire Roman hierarchy is turned upside down. Slaves are allowed to speak freely. Masters become servants. Social norms are relaxed, and the streets fill with the noise of feasts and masquerades. The celebration was accompanied by abundant feasts, gift-giving, and even gambling games, which were usually forbidden on ordinary days. For a modern person, this could be compared to a carnival, when the city turns into a huge stage for fun and freedom. Another ancient and mystical festival was the Lupercalia, held in mid-February. It was a festival of fertility and purification, during which the Luperci priests performed ritual ceremonies and ran through the city, striking passers-by with strips of goatskin. Although it sounds strange today, for the Romans, this ritual symbolized purification and protection from evil spirits, as well as helping to increase fertility. Imagine living in a world where religious rites were closely intertwined with daily life, and festivals included not only fun, but also deep faith. Besides religious celebrations, Rome had many secular holidays and calendar dates that were marked with lavish feasts, theatrical performances, and musical shows. During such festivals, streets were decorated with garlands and statues, and residents exchanged gifts, much like modern holidays. Interestingly, on festive days, strict laws and prohibitions were often suspended. Imagine that for several days a year, you could openly mock the authorities, joke without fear of punishment, and even change your social behavior. This temporary freedom helped relieve tension and strengthen social bonds. During these days, masquerades were held where people wore bright costumes and masks, hiding their identity and allowing themselves more freedom in behavior. This created a special atmosphere of mystery and fun, bringing together different social classes. Festivals and celebrations in ancient Rome were not only about relaxation, but also an important element of cultural and religious life, helping to maintain harmony between people and gods, as well as strengthening the sense of community and belonging to a great empire. If you imagine living back then, these days would be a true, bright island in everyday routine, when you could forget worries, immerse yourself in music, dance, feasts, and feel unity with the city and its traditions. If you lived in ancient Rome, the ability to blend in with the surrounding crowd was the key to a calm and safe life. In a society where every day you could become the object of envy, gossip, or even suspicion, standing out unnecessarily was not only inconvenient, but dangerous. The first and main rule was to dress modestly and appropriately. The toga, the famous symbol of Roman citizenship, was both a sign of your status and a required element of wardrobe for public appearances and official events. But if you did not belong to the upper class, or did not want to attract attention, it was better to wear a simple tunic, the usual clothing of most inhabitants. Imagine wearing a bright designer suit on the subway today. It would immediately draw glances and possibly unwanted attention. Similarly, in those times, overly bright or expensive clothing could arouse suspicion or envy, especially in city neighborhoods where the poor lived. If you dared to wear something more luxurious, it's important to remember the purple fabric worn by senators and emperors was so rare and expensive that ordinary people were strictly forbidden to use it. Breaking this rule could cost you your life. Imagine, today you can freely choose clothes according to your taste and budget. But back then, the color of your fabric literally decided your fate. The second important point was to avoid sharp political discussions in public. Rome was a place where politics permeated every aspect of life. But talking about power could lead not only to arguments, but also to serious problems, up to accusations of subversive activity. Even a joke about the emperor or a high-ranking official could have serious consequences. Sophia, If you lived then, it was better to stick to neutral topics or avoid discussions in groups where rumors and reports might be overheard. Furthermore, in public places such as forums or markets, loud shouting or excessive emotional outbursts were not allowed. It was considered bad manners and could attract the attention of the guards. Rome was a city of rumors and gossip, and the ability to keep your mouth shut and avoid getting involved in conflicts was an invaluable skill. Imagine that today you have social networks and messengers where news spreads instantly. Back then, oral stories played that role, which could quickly ruin your reputation. Finally, it was crucial to respect the gods and traditions. Romans were deeply religious, and honoring the gods was part of everyday life. If you showed disrespect, failed to offer sacrifices, neglected rituals, or openly mocked customs, it could raise suspicions of disrespect towards society and even lead to accusations of religious crimes. For a modern person, this is comparable to how in some countries it is important to follow cultural norms and traditions to avoid hostility or conflict. If you failed to show proper reverence, for example, upon seeing a statue of the emperor or during an official procession, you could be viewed with suspicion or hostility. Overall, to avoid standing out in ancient Rome, you had to be observant, cautious, and respectful to those around you, not only to people, but also to their beliefs and customs. This approach helped maintain peace and avoid trouble in a large, noisy, and sometimes dangerous metropolis. The ability to blend in with the crowd, be careful with your words, and respect traditions was your invisible armor, which helped not only to survive, but to live with dignity in the beating heart of the ancient city. If you lived in ancient Rome, earning a living was one of the main concerns for everyone, because your profession determined not only your life, but also your social status. Imagine you don't have modern technology or the internet, but you have many opportunities to prove yourself through skills and hard work. One of the most common ways to earn money was through craftsmanship. You could become a potter, making pots, jugs, and dishes needed by every family. Imagine your hands shaping clay on the potter's wheel, then the items drying in the sun and being fired in the kiln. Or you might be a blacksmith, working with metal, making tools, weapons, horseshoes. Imagine sparks flying from your forge, and your skills valued by the whole city. Weavers produced fabric, the main clothing of Romans, from tunics to cloaks. These skills were passed down from generation to generation, and mastery brought respect and a stable income. If you became a craftsman, you would notice that workshops were often small and cramped, with the sounds of hammers, the crackling of the forge, and the smell of clay blending into the everyday city noise. Workshops were often family businesses, where the craft was passed down from father to son. It was not just a job, but a whole way of life, where every item bore the mark of your soul and skill. If crafting wasn't your thing, you could try your hand at trade. Rome had many markets, insula, where people bought and sold everything imaginable, from fresh vegetables and fruits to exotic spices and silk from distant provinces. Imagine opening a small shop in a bustling neighborhood, where hundreds of buyers pass by daily. Or you might be a street vendor, loudly shouting to advertise your goods, attracting customers on the crowded and dusty city streets. Trading was not just business, but a true art, where persuasion skills and market knowledge mattered. Markets were real centers of social life and news. People didn't just buy food and goods there. They exchanged the latest gossip and political updates. Imagine hearing important news from a traveler or a weather forecast from an old merchant amidst the noise and bustle, because your sales success depended on it. Street trading was risky. You could be robbed or cheated with scales, so trust and reputation were extremely valuable. If you wanted to be a successful merchant, you had to build relationships with customers and have patrons from higher social classes. Without their support, the business would hardly survive. There was another path: providing services. If you were literate and could write, you could become a scribe, helping those who couldn't read or write, preparing documents, letters, even legal petitions. Imagine your writing skill turning into a source of income and respect. Literacy was rare in Rome, and possessing it meant having power. Educated people could become teachers, instructing children in grammar, rhetoric, and other sciences. Teachers in Rome were respected, as education was a luxury for most. If you had medical knowledge, you could become a doctor. Despite the primitive methods, doctors held an important place in society. Healing was difficult. Medicine mostly relied on herbal remedies and experience, and many diseases remained incurable. However, thanks to doctors like the famous Galen, Roman medicine achieved impressive results for its time. An interesting fact: some craftsmen and merchants formed professional associations, collegia. They helped each other in business, protected rights, and organized religious festivals for their brotherhood. Imagine having not only a profession, but also the support of like-minded people, which increased your status and security. If you were a soldier, after your service, you might be granted a plot of land, another way to earn and secure a stable social position. But the soldier's path was tough, with strict discipline, and desertion was punishable by death. Overall, regardless of whether you chose a craft, trade, or services, success depended not only on skills, but also on your ability to find the right people, maintain connections, and show patience. Every day was a small test of your cleverness and hard work, and your earnings were a ticket to a more stable and dignified life in the large, ancient city. So, if you dream of prosperity in Rome, be ready not only for hard work, but also for cunning, the ability to get along with people, and to build social networks. It was this combination of effort and connections that could lead you to success and respect among your fellow citizens, making your life more comfortable in this bustling metropolis. If you lived in ancient Rome and decided to go on a journey, you would be lucky. The Romans created one of the most advanced road networks in the world, a true masterpiece of engineering for its time. Imagine your road as a paved stone path laid through forests, mountains, and rivers, allowing you to travel quickly and relatively safely over long distances. These roads connected cities, military camps, trade centers, and were accessible not only to the army, but also to ordinary citizens. Before you lay a network of about 85,000 kilometers of roads. That's longer than the circumference of the Earth. About 29,000 kilometers of these roads were paved with stone, which prevented chariots from getting stuck in the mud after rain. These roads were built so well that some have survived to this day. Special courier services, cursus publicus, were created for the military and government officials to ensure the incredibly fast delivery of messages. Imagine, a letter from Rome to a distant province could arrive in just a few days. A real miracle in an era without the internet or postal services. Every 20-30 kilometers along the roads, there were postal stations, mansiones, where you could change horses, rest, eat, and even spend the night. Imagine arriving at such an inn during a long journey, hearing the clatter of hooves, the bustle of other travelers, the smell of fresh bread, and the murmur of conversations about the latest news of the empire. If you couldn't or didn't want to spend the night on the road, there were inns, also called mansions or kauponai. These were modest establishments where travelers could sleep, wash, and eat. Of course, comfort left much to be desired compared to modern hotels. Beds were simple and sanitation minimal. But in ancient conditions, this was a huge relief and protection from nighttime dangers. Traveling by sea in the Roman Empire was faster than by land, but far more dangerous. Imagine getting seasick from the rolling waves, with a storm visible in the distance. There were no modern navigation devices or life jackets then. Sea voyages were often accompanied by dangers, storms, pirates, and unpredictable winds. But for those who dared, new opportunities for trade and encounters with distant lands opened up. Roman roads were equipped with road signs and milestone markers, miliaria. Thanks to these, travelers knew how far it was to the nearest city or station. Today, you have GPS. Back then, there were only stone markers. Water routes, rivers, and canals were also used for trade and transportation of goods. The Romans even built canals to improve connections between cities and ports. Imagine large barges slowly sailing down the Tiber River, easing the delivery of goods to Rome. At a mansio, you could encounter various travelers, from soldiers to merchants and pilgrims. These places were true hubs, not only for exchanging goods, but also stories, rumors, and new ideas. Here's a fun fact. Some wealthy Romans organized their own luxurious journeys, complete with baths, banquets, and even theatrical performances directly on their carriage or along the way. For them, travel was not a tiring ordeal, but an extension of their social life. Thus, traveling in ancient Rome was not just about moving from point A to point B, but a real adventure that required preparation, endurance, and caution. Thanks to the developed infrastructure, however, you could count on relatively fast and safe movement across the vast empire, a huge, pulsating, and diverse world. And despite all the hardships, the advanced system of roads, inns, and services made it possible to connect a vast empire, giving people the ability to move, trade, and discover the world. Life in ancient Rome surprisingly resembles our modern times in many ways. Imagine the public baths. Romans gathered there not only for hygiene, but also for socializing, relaxation, and even business. You could say they were the equivalents of today's spas and fitness centers. Markets, macella, were centers of trade and social life, where you could buy a huge variety of goods, from fresh vegetables and spices to exotic delicacies. Theaters and amphitheaters gathered hundreds, and thousands of spectators, enjoying plays and gladiator fights, just like we go to concerts, cinemas, and sports events today. However, despite these similarities, the absence of modern conveniences made life much harder and sometimes dangerous. No central heating, sewage system, or clean drinking water in every home. Traveling, although eased by Roman roads, was still a test of endurance and patience. Medical care was limited, and social and legal norms were often harsh and uncompromising. If today you have comfortable homes, electricity, the internet, and a wide choice of products, then in ancient Rome, every one of these blessings, whether it's hot water in the bath, fresh bread on the table, or a safe road, was the result of complex infrastructure and a constant struggle against nature and circumstances, and immersing yourself in the world of an ancient metropolis. You realize that despite the difference in time and technology, human desires, joys, and difficulties remain eternal. Understanding these realities helps not only to comprehend how our ancestors lived, but also to appreciate what we have today. And who knows, maybe the answers to future challenges lie in studying the past. Surviving in ancient Rome is quite possible, but for that, you need not only to know about life at that time, but also to learn how to live by its rules. Adapting to the realities of the ancient metropolis means respecting traditions, religion, and social hierarchy, and knowing how to behave in society to avoid unnecessary attention and danger. It is important to be cautious, avoid conflicts, respond timely to threats, and understand the subtleties of political and social life. Even simple things, choice of clothing, place of residence, or proper behavior in public, could make a decisive difference. Thus, the secret to surviving in ancient Rome lies in flexibility, vigilance, and respect for the social order. Master these skills, and you will not only survive, but also find your place in this multifaceted, complex, but amazingly vibrant world.